Welcome to Firearms Friday from the Wyoming State Museum here in Cheyenne. My name's Evan Green. I'm the firearms historian for the museum. Hence, for about the last 5 or 6 years, I've been going through the firearms in the permanent collection, doing some research, trying to connect people and stories, and then enjoy making these videos for you. So, a little bit out of my wheelhouse today, in that we're not doing firearms, we're doing knives. So this knife was allegedly owned by a guy named Jim Baker. Well, who was Jim Baker? He was a fur trapper, mountain man, scout. He was with a scout with Crook at the Rosebud. He was with Crook on the Horse Meat March, 1876. He established a home in Savory, Wyoming. He's buried in Savory, Wyoming. And his cabin is on display there. So how did we acquire this knife? I have a letter from a guy named Frank White. Frank White, in 1942, donated a lot of artifacts to the Wyoming State Museum. He had Indian beadwork. He donated a trapdoor carbine that's featured in another video. So here's his story about this knife. And again, Frank White was employed by the Fireman's Fund Insurance Company. He was based out of Denver. He traveled the Rocky Mountain West extensively. And in his letter, he says he supervised 50 to 60 insurance agencies in the 1890s. Who knew? I didn't. So, here's his letter from 1942. Regarding the hunting knife, I was staging from Casper to Lander, and between Casper and Ronges, we were flagged down by a long-haired, medium-sized pioneer type of plainsman or hunter who had a burro and a pack animal of some sort. And he was acquainted with the stage driver, telling the stage driver that at a certain point along the road he had skinned out an antelope and left his knife there and wanted the stage driver to pick it up, give it to the Lander stage going the other way, and he would pick it up in Rawlins. So naturally, I was curious and asked questions, and was advised that the fellow's name was Jim Baker. Well, I was young in those days, and while I would not steal, I was afraid my ambition to possess such a marvelous relic rather acted as an opiate to my conscience, for I opened the dickering by saying that I would like very much to have that knife. But of course, they must give it to Jim, as he doubtlessly made it himself, carried it for years, valued it very highly. The driver replied, well, why don't you give him the price of a fine new marbles knife, which I will buy, and it happens that I am to drive the next coach into Rawlins, so I can get the knife there and tell him I did not think he would care much for that old thing of his, so I made the trade for him. So it's it's a very neat knife. The handle is antler, and I'm guessing either elk or by the size, possibly mule deer. This bolster between the blade and the handle appears to be lead or some other casting metal, which is also in the slots where the tang of the knife extends into the handle. The tang is secured by this one pin through the handle. So was this Jim Baker's knife? That story seems to hang together. The thing that I question is, you would think that had this been Jim Baker's knife and in his possession and used for a long time, it would show more wear. It would show evidence that it had been sharpened. But that's a minor point. I want to grab a reference book here. And if you're interested in the accoutrements from this era of the Mountain West, this is an excellent, excellent book on the firearms, traps, and tools of the mountain man by Carl P. Russell. And he has a picture of this knife in his book. And his statement is, Jim Baker, mountain man, lingered in some of his trapper haunts well into the modern period. Personal personal mementos of his experience in the fur field are preserved in several Western museums. The country-made knife and sheath is in the Wyoming State Museum and are documented to have been made and used by Jim Baker, received from Frank G. White. So maybe, I give it a definite maybe. And I thought it was interesting. There's another comment in the book at the end of the section on the mountain man's knives. It says, the significance of knives in the trapper's scheme. And this is the author, Carl P. Russell. As was true of guns, there was something very personal and intimate about the mountain man's favorite knife. He was given to endowing it with a personality, and often there seemed to be a sentimental attachment, as well as an appreciation of its practical worth. A good many instances of loss or theft of favorite knives are recorded. Usually a very determined effort was made by the owner to retrieve the valued arm. Sometimes this involved tedious backtracking on dimly marked trails or even mortal combat. The written record of such recoveries in the Far West begins with the Lewis and Clark journals of 1803 to 06 and is repeated time and again in diaries and narratives written by mountain men. In short, the iron knife was essential to the white trapper and hardly less valued by the Indian. So maybe old Jim Baker wouldn't have been very happy with a brand new knife. And Frank White committed a faux pas by maintaining the ownership of this particular handmade knife. The sheath that comes with it is interesting. It is obviously repurposed from another piece of leather that was used for something else, because there's evidence of stitching here and there and this extraneous hole, which don't relate to the function of the sheath itself. It's held together by this series of copper rivets around the edge, and the fringe has been cut on this side, and the fringe is so even that it makes me wonder if it was done by hand or if there was some talented leather worker with a machine of some sort that cut that fringe. The other thing that's curious is that this fringe at the top is machine sewed to the top of the sheath. So strange that the sheath obviously fits the knife very well, but who knows? I'm going to take it at face value and say, this is Jim Baker's knife. Let's look at another one, another knife. This one has the name Alex Matt on both sides of the sheath. It also is repurposed and also held together with this series of brass rivets. And on the back side, it's riveted, there's riveted belt loop. And the reason I'm pretty certain that this is a repurposed piece of leather is under that belt loop is an oval maker's stamp, which I can't make out or identify. But it's clearly Missoula, Montana on the bottom, and on the top it's 4 letters and the date 1885, and it's partially obscured by this belt loop piece here. But I called the Montana Historical Society. They have a really good book of listing of Wyoming or of Montana saddle makers. Didn't find anybody who matched those 4 letters. So the knife itself, I think, is really cool. And it shows the hand forging and the use in that it has been sharpened along both edges, marks that were missing from the Jim Baker knife. So this is also interesting in that the handle is also a repurposed piece of leather held in place by these 4 rivets. So who owned this knife? Well, we think it was this guy, Alex Matt. Well, who was Alex Matt? He was a Flathead Indian and allegedly the son of a Flathead chief. And the knife and sheath were donated by Alex son. So doing a little bit of research on Alex Matt, he was evidently a scout under Nelson Miles in 1877 when the Nez Perce Indians tried to make it to Canada to escape being forced onto a reservation against their will. They came across out of Idaho. They crossed Montana. They encountered some tourists in Yellowstone Park. It was a running fight with the American military. The Nez Perce were driving their livestock. They had old people and women and children and all their gear. And they got within about 40 miles of the Canadian border before they stopped and surrendered, and Chief Joseph said, "I will fight no more forever." Another kind of sad story about how Native Americans were dealt with in the American West. So, a couple of interesting knives. I really like this one. This one, to me, looks like a mountain man's knife, or in this case, a warrior's knife, a Flathead Indian. So, anyway, I think those are interesting. And as I work my way through the firearms, I'm eventually going to finish the firearms. I still have a great number that I want to do videos about, but I think you may be seeing, if you are interested, more videos on non-firearms, but still items that are related to the history of Wyoming, history of the Rocky Mountain West. So if you got comments or questions about knives or firearms, leave it in the comments below or give me a call at the Wyoming State Museum. I'm not here every day, but they take messages, and I'll get back to you if you have questions. I'm always interested in talking about firearms or Western history with the people who watch these videos. So thanks for watching.